Built it right, built it strong, built it fast, built it done, built it true, built it real, yeah, I built it.
All right, back at it. Another day. Unfortunately, no doggy with me today. Doggy has his name's Rodeo. Rodeo has a hurt paw and needs to take a couple days off. Let it heal. He is gonna be in the cone of shame. Man, dogs do not like that cone collar, but he won't stop looking at it, so. All right, well, today I wanted to be talking about validation. That is the topic on my mind today. Validation. What is validation? And some nuances of the term. You know, we use that term in a lot of different ways. I was watching a video and on there it said recipe validation or something. It was a food thing. I like watching those food videos, and it was something about validating the dish, that the chef wanted to validate it, right? And that got me thinking, is the chef really validating that it's meeting the need, or is he taste testing to make sure it was done correctly? Because that would be verification. And just that common everyday language mix up. I think we do mix those two terms up quite a bit. And it's really important to get it nailed down in your head. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, is the difference between verification and validation. And then double click, zoom into validation and look at the nuances of how we can use that term when things are unvalidated or they've been disvalidated, right? Have you ever been disvalidated? Or maybe a less commonly used one, which is misvalidation. So getting into that, but really to start things off, the nuances of the word validate and the difference between that and verification, or to verify something, right? So the big difference that I keep it sorted in my head is verification is just making sure you did what you meant to do, right? You executed the plan like you had set up to do, right? You made a plan and you went down the checklist, boom, 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 implement, 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 deliver, deliver, deliver. And now we're gonna verify that we did in fact follow all of the steps, right? Verification is all about checking your work. If you ever checked your work, you're verifying. And that is what verification is, right? It's all about verifying, just to use it in a sentence. It's the spelling bee. You know, have you verified that you did everything you wanted to do? Did you verify it? Has your work been verified? Has your work been shown to be done according to what it needed to be, according to the spec, right? So for example, let's say you're doing a homework project and your teacher said, oh, you have to write a paper that's 500 words, okay, 500 word essay. Well, how many words did you write? Have you written 450? Okay, well then your work cannot pass verification. Now, let's say you have 550 words. Well, was that a limit or was that a minimum? If it was a minimum, great, your work's been verified. You've passed your verification checks. Now, let's say you haven't tested, right? Let's say you implemented something, you've delivered it, but you haven't checked your work yet. Well, that is called when something is unverified. It has yet to be verified. Did you do what was specified, what the expectation was, right? You have a solution and you're testing the quality of that solution against some standard, okay? Against some requirements, against architecture, some design. You're doing verification work, okay? So a lot of times in workflows, debugging, right? If you're a software guy, you do a lot of verification, right? You're always testing to make sure there's not a bug in the system, or maybe some code was really sloppily implemented. But let's say you're more of a natural language person and you're a writer. Well, you're gonna do the same exact thing, right? Sometimes sentences get written that are very sloppy and it needs to be crisper, it needs to be shorter, more compact. Maybe it's not written in an active voice. Well, you're doing the same thing. You have some sort of standard in your mind, and you're gonna go through and do a verification check to make sure that that deliverable is correct, was done well, according to your standard, according to the spec. Okay, so that's what verification is all about. It's using a spec, translating that spec into some sort of reference, and then testing your deliverable, that solution, against that reference. That's about as easy as it gets with verification. Now we're gonna flip the script and go to validation, right? Validation also uses the solution, but it uses the solution in a completely different way, right? So unlike verification, which is testing a requirement, validation is using the solution to ensure that that solution actually met the need, okay? That there was some sort of problem and it actually solved the problem, okay? That's how I think about it. Did the solution solve the problem? Well, that's all about validation, right? Using the solution to make sure it met the need, right? So unlike making sure that the solution was properly implemented, right, according to some specification, this is all around validating it was actually solving the problem. So back to the homework example, right? You verified that you met the minimum word standard. You wrote your 500-word essay. You verified it, right? Passes checks. Now, did it actually meet the need, right? Did it actually solve the problem? Maybe it was a word problem, or your essay on the Odyssey or something. And did it actually meet the need? Did it actually do the trick? Did the teacher like the essay? Well, your grade will reflect that, right? Did you actually, pretty much your letter grade in part of the rubric will be partly due to passing verification checks, and then the content of your essay will be if it passed validation checks, which is actually meeting the needs of the teacher for whatever that content needed to be, okay? So did it solve the problem? Did you actually write the essay to meet the need, to satisfy the desires of your teacher? And did you follow the instructions, and did you verify that you actually followed the instructions, okay? So a score, a test outcome, in that case would be in part due to verification and in part due to validation. And there you go. And I think that's probably, not on processing, that's probably why people get those terms confused, because a lot of times in the real world, a solution needs to obviously work, right? It needs to work as intended, that's verification, and it needs to work to solve the problem. It needs to meet the needs, so you gotta do both. There's no way around it. I think that's the beauty of V&V, which is short for verification validation, right? The other thing that's confusing to people is that you can zoom in any project to validate, for example, a requirement. So let's say you have a project and it has a requirement, right? It has a requirement that, like I said, that essay needs to be 500 words at a minimum, okay? That requirement in and of itself needs to be validated. What the heck? So now we have to verify and validate our actual spec, right? That's where things get real trippy in your mind. Because what does it mean to validate a requirement, or to validate your spec in general? Well, that's just meaning that specification, that design plan, those requirements you listed out, those are the ones that actually are gonna solve the problem, right? So before you even implement the solution, you can validate your design by going back to the user, back to the end operator, and say, hey, these are the requirements I'm thinking. Can you validate from what you know that they're actually gonna meet the needs of what you're asking for? And then you can verify that those requirements were properly specified, properly implemented, right? So sometimes people have rules for how they write out requirements, or rules for how you write out a design, and you can verify that you actually followed that standard at your company. So you can really zoom in as much as you want, right? You can verify and validate a plan. You can verify and validate the deliverable. You can verify and validate the need. You can verify and validate anything. And I think, but once you get those terms in your head and understand what those are, all you got to do is just look at any object, look at any part of your project, make that the outcome in your head, and then verify and validate it, right? Did you test it? So, and did you test it in both ways? That it was properly done, right? That you did what you meant to do, you built it correctly, you built it well, and then you actually, it's doing what it needed to do to solve the problem or to meet the need, right? That's validation. So that's probably enough of those two terms and parsing those out. So now I want to just focus on validation and how it gets used and abused in everyday language. You know, when you have a need that you've identified and you've decided, yeah, let's make this a product or a project, I should say. We're going to pursue a solution. Okay, so maybe at your company, what's a good example? Hey, we're gonna overhaul our org structure. Oh gosh, here we go. You know, our team is growing, the company's growing, or maybe we just had layoffs, and we're gonna do a reorg. Well, that's a big project. So let's say you're gonna do a big old fat reorg. Okay, cool. That's a big need. What's the need, right? What's the need that reorg is solving? Well, it's probably a bunch of miscommunication. Your team's grown. Maybe some teams need to be regrouped. Maybe there's some office politics. Maybe someone just got canned, or someone just up and quit because they were over it. And all of a sudden now we're like, okay, well, we're having some big gaps, some communication breakdowns. We need to formalize, we need to restructure in order to make this organization more operationally effective. Okay, cool. Operation reorg is a go. So there's your need, and that's the solution, right? The reorg structure is the solution. And so you guys are working on, you're meeting together, your different teams are coming around, and your executive director, your CEO is popping in and talking to you. She's all wondering what your needs are and what the team is up to and where the gaps are, and would it be helpful to bring this person on, or maybe transfer that person onto a different team. You're doing a little bit of baseball card trading, and that's going on. Okay, that's great. So you're getting a plan together. Now, this plan that you're specifying out, you're speccing out, the new design, the new org chart. Maybe there's an org chart flying around, and or maybe it's being hidden. It's a secret org chart. And there's some scheming going on behind closed doors, and people are freaking out. People are worried. People are worried that they're going to get demoted, promoted, transferred. Who knows what's going on? And but there's a plan. Now, how do you know that reorg is going to solve your problem? Man, it was made. A decision was made. A decision was made. There's a problem between our teams. There's communication breakdown, and you know what? We're going to do a big old reorg. That is a humongous decision. But how do you know? Have you validated that massive investment is actually going to solve the problem? Well, according to this scenario, let's say no. Let's say that really this whole thing was a giant reaction to a couple people quitting and a couple bad hires getting fired, okay? Or maybe there's a disruption in the market somehow, and you guys are having to respond, right? This whole thing is very reactive, and the top dogs just unilaterally decided that this is what we should do, and yet the solution has not been validated, right? It has not been proven that massive reorg is actually going to solve any of the company's problems. We call that when a solution has been or is unvalidated. It has yet to be validated. It is in a state where we have a hypothesis, if you want to put it in the scientific method terms, we have a hypothesis that the solution is going to solve the problem. However, have we tested that solution? Nope, we sure have not. It is an unvalidated solution. And it is an expensive unvalidated solution, not only in terms of maybe hiring people, training, onboarding, but just in think about all the meetings that are going to have to take place. Think about all of the IT, all the distro lists that are going to have to be updated. Oh God. So this unvalidated solution is a huge investment. And yet we just make these decisions on the fly, right? They just seem right. So in engineering and design and project management, in the whole space, there's a huge conversation about early validation. And hopefully at this point, you can see why early validation is so important, because what you don't want is to spend the next year and a half developing a reorg, launching it, and it does not solve any of the problems, right? You spend all this time, all this effort to maybe fix some bad communication channels. Maybe you want to migrate to a matrix org structure, or maybe you decided to go flat and you were super hierarchical and now you're flat. And all of the same problems come right along into that new org solution. Oof, that was a big old waste of time. That was a big swing and a miss. So that it was the motivation for why you want early validation. So what is early validation? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's when you have a solution or a small chunked version of that solution, right? A dialed down minimum viable solution version that you then test, right? So instead of doing a massive company-wide rollout of the new flat structure or a new matrix structure, you just try it on one team, right? You just try it on one team, or maybe just one little unit within a team, depending on how you guys structure yourself, right? You try it with 4 people, you try it with 10 people, and you see how it plays out. Did it change anything? Did it work? Did it make things better? According to what that solution was meant to do, right? We wanted something to increase, to decrease communication breakdown. We wanted something to increase production efficiency. We wanted something to help us make our deadlines better. We keep being late and over schedule and over budget. Did that actually happen? That's the question. So I think early prototyping, early validation is a great way to see if you're barking up the right tree. Now, sometimes what happens is you test a solution and it solves a different problem. Well, that's interesting. I mean, we kind of talked about that before, is when a solution solves a problem you didn't expect or a different need, all of a sudden you might say, hey, that didn't solve that, but that did solve for this, which is also a problem. Let's go for it. That's awesome. But it doesn't solve the initial problem, right? So we still got to figure that one out. So early validation forces you to do something very much connected to scoping, right? Early validation forces you to think about what part of the need you're trying to solve, right? What part of the need is the most pressing or the most mission critical or the most painful thing you need to address, right? Well, golly, that sounds an awful lot like scoping. And that is because, yes, those two tasks are deeply connected. Now, how are they both connected? Well, they're both part of the feedback tasks, verification, validation, and scoping. But more than that, they're the ones that they're the ones that are both focusing on the needs of the problem, right? Or the desires or the issue at hand. So validation can work with scoping to get you to early prototypes. How do you do that? Well, you scope down the needs that you're addressing, so that way what you need to do in terms of validation is also smaller in scope. Well, that seems pretty obvious once you put it that way, right? But what ends up happening instead is an executive, a C-suite person, they're big picture people, right? They got all the org level understanding. They're not going to be thinking about all the details. So when they say, let's do a reorg, that's just the level that they're operating at. So they're not thinking, hey, how do we scope down to a team, or where can we pilot this restructure, this reorg, right? They're thinking much more macro. So if you can convince someone at that level, hey, love the idea, let's scope it down, do an early prototype or a pilot version of this so we can get some quick validation, then that will enable us to make sure that the investment is worth it. One, it's actually going to solve the problem. And two, it will help us gauge for specification and delivery a healthier timeline and a healthier budget, right? A more realistic budget and timeline. So that is the advantage of going with early prototyping, early validation. Plus, it will help you understand a lot of the verification tasks you're gonna have to do and all of that. So that's how you do it. That is how you get to early validation. And if you don't, what ends up happening instead is you invest massively, you overscope, you have huge schedule delays. It doesn't actually solve the problem because you wait to the very end to do validation. So the entire project is unvalidated. You spend 99% of your time and budget on the project and you haven't even done validation. Ridiculous, ridiculous. You should do better. I should do better. We all need to do better. We all need to get better at scoping down, trying a smaller version, getting some early validation, using that as data to then drive to the fuller project to be more successful. That's unvalidated and early validation. What about disvalidation and misvalidation? So disvalidation is all around when something has been disvalidated. It is not valid, right? It is dissatisfactory. It is not doing the trick, right? So using that same example, or even the homework example from before, yeah, sure, you verified, you passed all your verification checks. Your essay meets, it's Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, 1-inch margins on, 8.5 by 11 paper. What else? It's a docx file. It 500 word minimum. You got your name, the date, the course, whatever. Just that standard kind of layout. But you know what? Your content was garbage. I could tell that ChatGPT or Claude did that for you in about 30 seconds. You copied and pasted and you didn't even try, right? You gave it the spec and man, there is no voice. Where is your voice? It is not there because you did not put it there, because you did not actually care about the assignment. So when the teacher reads it, they'll be able to say, yeah, I can verify. You followed the spec, but guess what? You didn't meet the need. You didn't scratch the itch. When I read it, I felt like I was talking to a computer because I was. And I'm left wanting. I wanted your personality. I wanted to feel how you felt about the Odyssey, and you didn't give it to me. So I'm gonna say that is a disvalid solution. Oof, yikes. You are not valid. Goodbye. So you can do all of the verification you want, but sometimes you deliver a solution that's just not valid. It's a disvalid solution. That's how that goes. You did the reorg. Your CEO led the charge. They were brought in because there was this huge recall and the CEO got fired. And so they brought in an interim CEO, probably with an MBA, was working at McKinsey for 20 years. And now they're gonna come in and do a reorg, solve all the company's problems, and they're fired in 2 years because the reorg didn't solve any of the problems because it was a disvalid solution. Yikes, okay? That's how these projects go. Everything is a pattern, right? Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee the pattern. You wanna get your mind to a point where you can start seeing how these patterns work, right? Oh, we underscoped, we overscoped, we misscoped, and now we're paying for it. We didn't get to validation soon enough. Now we're 6 months in and paying the price, right? Once you start understanding what the healthy version of patterns look like, you start really noticing what the unhealthy ones look like. And you're just gonna be an incredible project participant, project manager, project leader, project extraordinaire, right? My goal is to make you, along with myself, a master, a project master. Master at doing project, projects. Now, that was disvalidation, early validation, unvalidated, validated. What about misvalidation? Validation. Now, this one is potentially very confusing, but this is probably the most interesting one because of my statistics background, because of my data scientist background, that misvalidation is all about what you thought, how you measured validation versus what it's actually doing in the real world, okay? Now, everyone has to test validation somehow, right? You have to test validation. And you're gonna have to develop some indicators, some metrics by which you measure your validation, how you go about seeing if what you thought would work did actually work, did actually solve the problem. And how you measure it has error, right? You can measure things incorrectly. Now, a lot of times when we do validation, there's really no formal measurement that we're using, but sometimes in large projects, there are. Customer satisfaction is one of those. What is that one? That one where it's like you're measuring, it's that KPI, that business KPI, where it's how likely someone is to share your product with someone else, right? I can't remember it, but there's a bunch of different KPIs on testing, validating that your solution is actually meeting the need, right? But all of these measures have error. And so there's all sorts of ways that people try to mitigate this error, because the last thing you want to do is misvalidate your solution, okay? So there's a couple ways you can misvalidate. And if you think about it from a statistics lens, you have your prediction, okay? You have your prediction, hey, which is based off the measure, right? So you ever measure your prediction of the solution you have, and you've measured it in a certain way. And because of that measurement, you feel confident, okay? Confident that your solution solves the problem, all right? So you're predicting that the solution is solving the problem positively, right? But in reality, it did. Great, good job. You properly predicted it. Your measure actually corresponds to the need, and that is a good thing for you. That is a good thing for you. Likewise, let's say you use those same exact measures, and it says that you did not validate, right? It's actually been disvalidated. You did not pass validation checks, and guess what? You didn't in the real world, right? Your metrics properly corresponded to the reality of the situation. Your users don't actually like it, and your metrics say it. They reflect it. Great. You are accurately predicting that it is a disvalid solution. But what happens in these other two cases, right? Those are the two cases, but the other two cases have error, right? You say, I think, based off these metrics, that our users love the solution, right? They love our solution. They think it's awesome. Because of this early validation, you go for it, and then you launch, and guess what? It falls flat on its face. Well, my friend, that was a bad prediction, right? You falsely predicted a positive signal. That is a false positive. That is an error. That is a type 1 error. So now what's going to happen is you confidently, because of early data, went gung-ho for it, invested on all this stuff, and you were wrong. Oof, yikes. That is called misvalidation. You were misvalidating what was going on. Then there's this other version, which is also equally as bad, which is you did some early validation and your metrics came back and it says your people don't like it. The solution ain't working. But guess what? It did. It did work. You just didn't give enough time. You didn't pour the gas on. You didn't let it breathe, or maybe you had a bad sample. Just the people were not vibing that day. When they checked your product out, or when your users or your boss looked at your work, bad chili the night before, bad cup of coffee, the kids were up all night and you did not get a good read, right? They hated it, but actually, if you would ask them the next day, totally fine, totally into it. So that is a type 2, right? It's a false negative. And actually, it's not negative. Maybe I have those backwards, doesn't matter. So that's a type 2 error. So you have this situation where misvalidation can occur, either where you are overconfident the solution is working and it actually ain't, or you're thinking the solution ain't working, so you pivot, and you didn't need to. That is a huge opportunity cost, right? Man, we were 90% of the way done, and then we pivoted because we got some bad data on validation, and now we're gonna restart from scratch, when really, if we would have just finished, everything would have been fine. Everything would have been great. So, unfortunately, these things happen, right? And this is why you have to be super careful with how you measure your validation. Now, a lot of people, if it's a solo product, solo project, maybe you're the end all be all. If the project is for you, yourself, and I, well, you get to be the determinant of, or the determiner if that project is successful or not, right? Let's say you're making some mac and cheese because you're hungry and you ate it and that thing filled your belly up and you ain't hungry anymore. Great, validation, check. There ain't no false positives or false negatives there, right? You knew what you were going for and it happened. But on large scale projects where all of a sudden you're having to coordinate across teams, you're maybe not even the one in charge of delivery or implementation, you're definitely not interacting with the operators or the end user, you're gonna have to make some decisions on how these KPIs get measured, these validation metrics happen. And you're gonna have to make some hard calls, because these metrics better correspond very well, right, to the real world. Because otherwise you could be getting some false positives, some false negatives. You're gonna get some misvalidation going on. And that's gonna spell a big fat failure, right? Fail, F, the F on the score, on both on your homework and on the reorg and on your project. So that is a problem. So my advice to you is to look at your validation metrics as a project in and of themselves, right? Who's in charge of how you go about validating your solutions? Who's in charge? Who's on the hook for owning validation, right? You need to assign someone the role, and I love this role name, the validator, right? The validator. Sounds like the Terminator. But you want a validator. You need a person on your team that this is their perspective. This is the perspective on your team. This is the role, the hat that they wear, which is to be the validator. They're the ones who are thinking about the metrics. They're the ones thinking about how things get measured and compared and delivered to the user. They're the one meeting with the users. They're the one making sure that all of the metrics you're going for actually correspond to reality, that things just are vibing, right? Things are lining up, things are making sense. There's no confusion if it's being improperly understood by the user. You know, they're owning the validation process when it comes to that project outcome. Because when you have someone own the role, they can really embody that perspective fully, and they can focus on all of the things that go into validation. What ends up happening by default, which is less than helpful, is that whoever implemented the solution, right, the implementer, the deliverer, and then did verification, they're just gonna hand it off to whoever's on sales, and that's it. That's gonna be a problem, right? Because if no one's owning validation, maybe you have some end metrics, some end user metrics, but if no one is explicitly owning validation, and it's just a baton race between whoever spec'd out the project, maybe your front end sales team scoped the project for you, you just got it handed, they met with some operations person, they assigned it to a project team, the project team took it, spec'd it out, delivered it, did verification, kicked it back to marketing, kicked it back to biz dev, kicked it back to sales, they give it to the user and the user says, yeah, this is garbage. Who in that process is owning validation? Who's owning it? No one. It's just an afterthought. It's a wish, a hope, and a dream. And I can tell you right now, that ain't a strategy, right? Wish, hopes, and dreams ain't strategies. So you got to get a strategy, you got to get a plan, you got to assign someone the role, the validator. Plus it just sounds stinking cool. Who doesn't want to be the validator? I mean, granted, I'd be the verifier. That's cool too. The verifier sounds like a ray gun. But the validator, that sounds like a Terminator. And I like that. So that's where I'm gonna leave you today. Who on your team is the validator? Who on your team works with the end user? Who on your team is thinking about, is this solution really meeting the need? They're the ones owning it. They're the ones measuring it. They're the ones making sure those metrics actually make sense. They're the ones who are working with early prototyping, with your scoping people, the people at the front end, making sure that the project gets scoped well so you can do early validation. They're the ones making sure things are getting validated rather than leaving things unvalidated. They're making sure that when things are disvalidated, they're understanding exactly why, right? They're trying to minimize misvalidation, right? You need a validator. So anyway, that's everything. I'm gonna get back to it, and until next time.